Hey there, everyone. It is Christy. It is Sunday. It is time for Weekend Winters. Hello. How are you? I hope you are happy, healthy, COVID-free, and doing well wherever and whenever it is that you are. I was a little bit delayed in the show today getting started because I realized, too, if I put my sound on, you hear the music coming out of my headphones and it gets echoey. So it was just a little bit of delay in order to have better quality. Anyway, hi. Hello, everyone. Also in the chat, I haven't put them on the screen yet, but I see the Lucky Wanderer and DNF fan. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Today, to be honest, I want to say up front, I wasn't quite sure what the show was going to be about because I literally realized last night, oh yeah, I've got a show to do tomorrow. I don't need my headphones on anymore. I can take these off. And so I've tried to bring this up actually on Twitter and nobody seems to really care. So I'm going to use my show as a way to discuss it. But I want to talk about the Lincoln Project. I just did my hair as well. I got to check it in the mirror. I want to talk a little bit about the Lincoln Project and where it fits in American politics in terms of where my understanding from voting behavior and political space and some tactical things. But before we start, I also just want to have a little rant. Not really a little rant. It's not really a rant, a moan. Maybe that's the way to think about it. Having a bit of a moan. And it has to do with the way that people talk about the Biden candidacy and American politics in general. So here's the thing. Having lived in America and having met lots and lots of voters, and especially rural voters, people who think of themselves as independents, the kinds of person who votes for the person, not the party. I feel like I generally have a pretty good handle on where white Americans, especially, tend to be. And a lot of the swing voters, turnout is important in every category. But it is white voters in particular who in rural whites or independents who lean maybe Republican, white suburban women in the suburbs who and their choices are very important in these elections. And so as a consequence, whatever candidate we have, whether it be on the left or the right, has to make an appeal to those voters. And Republicans, because it is the party of white people, Let's face it. The Republicans have have had for several years an advantage with white voters. And the whole rhetoric about rugged individualism and lifting yourself up by your bootstraps and all that kind of stuff works great when you have white privilege. When you have white privilege and you're not the victim of systemic racism or oppression or discrimination, well, yeah, it's really easy to go out there and make your way in the world. Because you don't have any institutional barriers, or you don't have a system that literally preys on you for criminal fines and other criminal enforcement over policing in order to fund the local city budget. So there's a whole thing about Republicans and the myth of sort of the white version of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and all that. Anyway, we saw in 2008 the Obama coalition. We saw how Obama was able to bring together a necessary critical mass of groups that were key to his victory. Namely, there was high enthusiasm amongst black voters, which black voters are the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. I don't know if white liberals globally have quite internalized this, but white liberals don't, yes, white people are the face of the Democratic Party, but the real power in the voting has been increasingly shifting to black voters because it's black voters who turn up. And especially older black voters and especially black women. Those are the powerhouses now. These are the people, it's not me, it's not people who look like me who are having the most influence, right? People who look like me are freaking Karens. Right? And so the Democratic Party increasingly is, I think, hopefully acknowledging, and I hope Biden acknowledges this with his VP pick, is a party where people of color and black voters especially have a great degree of political autonomy and sway. And rightly, because they're the ones who show up. So Obama excited that important part of the Democratic base. He also appealed to suburban women of all backgrounds. I mean, I think we tend to assume suburban women are white, but I think when you just look at affluence, it's not limited. You know, there are well-paid women of color too, and you know, they're probably more easily swayed, but they would be also what I would consider suburban voters because of their location where they vote. And then there are rural whites, and Obama won with rural whites. And that is really the Obama coalition. It's not a far left coalition. It's not a socialist coalition. And finding that sweet spot in the general election is what puts candidates over and allows them to win. So I'm not gonna drop any names. I'm not gonna say any names. If you want to go on Twitter and look this up, that's fine. I don't know when you're gonna watch this video. But I just had a little exchange with someone who's on the other side of the planet. I mean, fair enough, I don't live in America, but I am American, and I do vote there. This person doesn't live in America and was trashing Joe Biden, saying he was mentally incompetent, which is an ableist slur. We know that Joe Biden has a stutter, and because of his stutter, he struggles for words sometimes, and he is gaffe-prone, but he is not mentally deficient in any way, and I think that slur, especially from people who claim to be progressives, really needs to freaking stop. It really needs to stop. And this person was just attacking Biden as trash, as a terrible candidate. As a terrible candidate. The guy who is up 10 points against Donald Trump is a terrible candidate. And why is he a terrible candidate? I mean, what I pointed out in sort of opposition to this idea that Biden is a terrible candidate is, one, he's winning. And two, the framing is that the American people have been given a choice between two terrible candidates. And this is something I see, and I just want to point this out because it's on my mind. I see this from the progressive left. I see this from white progressive leftists a lot, not all of them, but a lot of them will blame the DNC or will blame some kind of like nebulous evil thing for Joe Biden. When the fact is, Joe Biden was democratically elected. Joe Biden is people picked him. And not just like by a squeaker. He blew out the competition. I mean, it took him a little while, and it took till South Carolina, but once black voters, and let's be clear about this, black voters in the aggregate in South Carolina after the Clyburn endorsement, they're like, okay, we're going to go with this guy. They got behind him. They lifted him up. And they put him on the path to just an amazing victory on Super Tuesday. And it was black voters turning up and turning out and supporting Biden. And it's not like black voters don't know about what Biden voted for the crime bill, or that Biden was friends with segregationists. Or it's not like black women aren't aware of the fact that he was doing boundary violations and apologized for it and has changed so far. And so what I see is that white progressives, far left progressives, who are not happy that Sanders didn't win, are continuing to tear down Biden and ignoring the fact that he was selected by black voters and then other Democratic people, supported him, kind of came along afterwards. And it just seems to be super insulting to make these accusations about Biden, that he's a terrible candidate. Oh, I was asked, name great policies that Biden has. Biden is, he came out in favor of the public option after the primary. He came out in favor of doing some free tuition things after the primary. On issues, progressives won. Like, it might not be Bernie Sanders, M for A, but, like, don't take the W. Like, do you get Biden for policy is the most progressive Democratic candidate running for the first time, like not as an incumbent, ever. He is out there on trans issues and LGBT rights. He's talking about dismantling systemic racism. Obama couldn't talk about that because he was black and white people would have freaked out. Biden is addressing systemic racism. He's adopted the public option. He's talking about tuition-free college. So he's not Bernie Sanders. That doesn't mean he's a terrible candidate. And he's winning everywhere. He is winning in red states. He's like pulling even in red states. He is winning with seniors. He is winning with independents. He is winning with people who hate both Biden and Trump. So when it comes to picking a good candidate, to me, black voters did a great job. Black voters found the candidate that they had. See, this is like black voters in America have been voting for crappy white Democratic candidates for decades now. We've always had imperfect candidates in every single election. And black voters are incredibly pragmatic because they know what it really takes to get change done. And change doesn't come in fiery rhetoric. It comes in hard work and slow progress because that has been their experience. And that is why they got behind Biden and not Sanders. The people who are mad at Biden have to ask, well, how did Bernie Sanders fail with black voters so badly? Because that is who ultimately swayed the election, the primary of who won. So and then when I point out the power of black voters, the influence that black voters and black women especially have when they made their pick, and then white far left progressive people who don't live in America, and you can say, blah, 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 but I mean, you're coming from the outside and telling people who democratically elected their own candidate, their own primary candidate for their own party, that they picked a terrible candidate. What are you saying about those voters? I mean, for me, considering Biden is up for 10 points, I don't see that they made a bad choice. I think that black voters made an excellent choice, that they understood what is electable in America. And right now, Biden is up. Now, of course, things can change. Who knows what's going to happen? But in terms of the structure, I think things are really getting baked in. So, I guess I'm happy to go toe-to-toe on people who want to say Biden is a terrible candidate because he adopted all of those. He adopted Warren's positions on things. He adopted Bernie's positions on some things. And he's winning in states with rural whites and undecideds and people who are leaving the Republican Party. How is he a terrible candidate? I don't get it. Christy, do you want America to use socialism or capitalism, and can you explain why, please? I would be very happy with a sort of a European, Nordic model of democratic sort of socialism, because I think that that's just as with expanding the ACA from what the ACA was that we could get with Obama in the White House and Democrats in the Congress, now having that foundation and expanding it to a public option, that's generally how these kind of policies go forward. That's a kind of history. You start with something and you expand it, like Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. Those programs have expanded over time. And so I don't think that it's practical or even in any way really feasible for America to go from capitalism to socialism. But I do see that if we had Dems in the House and the Senate and the White House, and we have a progressive movement that is pushing things on reforming, restructuring taxes, restructuring capitalism, restoring unions. I mean, that would be a huge move in the right direction. People forget that on the state level, Republicans have worked state by state to create these so-called right-to-work laws, which is basically get the right to get paid less. They're anti-union bills. And so enabling unions to use their power as labor to negotiate and bring that power to the bargaining table is something that Democrats could do. So I think that would be the most successful way to make those kinds of economic changes. So anyway, I'm just kind of done with especially these white guys who want to trash Biden as a product of the DNC in order to avoid dealing with the fact that they don't understand. They're not dealing with the fact that black voters especially were key to Biden's win, and not asking themselves, how do I better appeal to those voters? And also just using ableist slurs. Can we stop that now, please? Okay. So, that being said, now I got that off my chest. Let's talk a little bit about what the show is going to be about, and that is the Lincoln Project. What should people on the left think of the Lincoln Project? And I think it's a complicated question. So again, putting on political scientist, analyst hat. If you go back a couple decades, there are, it isn't entirely 100% accurate, but as a general shortcut, you can think about America as a sort of left-right spectrum, very dichotomously. Again, this is just, it's not meant for perfection. It's not meant to be analytically perfect. It's just meant to be sort of conceptually convenient. You would have Democratic candidates and then left-leaning groups, PACs, super PACs, other advocacy groups, helping the Democrat by putting positive ads up or attacking the Republican with negative ads. And on the flip side, you had the other, which was the Republican candidate running, and then Republican PACs or Club for Growth, those types of pro-Republican groups attacking the Dem or doing positive ads for the Republican candidate. And looking at even in 2016, that was still very much the case. You were starting to get Never Trumpers, but they weren't a cohesive group, and they really didn't have any political clout. They were more a sign, sort of a canary in the coal mine, if you want to say, that Republicans, the party was fracturing. That there were some people who were previously considering themselves Republicans who would now were disassociating themselves with the party. And although there were loud, prominent, publicly known voices, they really didn't carry any political weight in terms of impacting the 2016 election. And since 2016, we've had 2018. And people forgetting like 2018 happened. And I understand why, because we're also traumatized for people on the left, by 2016 and the way that the votes split out in the Electoral College. We are instinctively not going to relax, like we're too emotionally damaged to ever trust the result of the election until we see, Trump out of the White House. But since 2016, Trumpism has increasingly forced people who believed what I would call the Republican lie. We're not a racist party. We believe in individual freedom. We believe in self-empowerment. We believe in the individual. We don't believe government should give you a handout or a hand up. We think you should do it all on your own. Which again, when you're white and you're not the person being discriminated against in hiring, or in even like screening job applications for interviews or education, all those, that's an easy line to buy. And that economic argument, this is also important. The best predictor of a presidential election, now I'm not saying it's the only predictor, but what I'm saying is if you wanted to pick one metric by which you put money on the outcome of an election, people's perception of the economy in America really correlates very, very highly in the same direction. It's not a determinative, but it correlates. So if you have a positive view on the economy, especially I think if you're white, you don't really care, not all white people, but there are enough white people who didn't care about Trump's racism or Trump's sexism. They just wanted money in their pockets. Now we're getting to a point where the economy is so bad that people are feeling negative about the economy, and that's really bad for the incumbent. And in those situations, they're looking for a change candidate. It doesn't mean that they're morally better. It just means that their economics trump a lot of other things. So, with these voters in mind and their alienation now, we're finding that a lot of people who supported Trump the first time, or who didn't actively work against Trump, or sat out the election and didn't vote for Clinton because they felt like they didn't have a proper choice, are now motivated to vote for Biden. And I think one of the things that the Lincoln Project does, that it changes 2020 fundamentally, this is another reason why 2020 isn't like 2016, is that they understand now the psychology of those voters. Not only understand it, but they're harnessing it and using it to drive people away from Trump. And they're also taking up a political space in the discourse that didn't exist in 2016. That political space is successfully trolling Donald Trump. In 2016, nobody successfully trolled Donald Trump. Anything that was done by the DNC or Democratic funded groups were just seen as an extension of Clinton, right? So you can kind of dismiss that as partisan hackery or partisan advertising. And Clinton was having a hard time trolling. It's hard for a presidential candidate. It would be hard for any Democratic presidential candidate to get as dirty as Trump, because Trump doesn't have a bottom. Trump is amoral. And so it's not just that he slings mud. He lives in the mud. He is scum. He is absolute scum. And when you're running for the office of president and you're not a narcissist, sort of sociopathic man-child, you want to maintain some level of dignity. You want to bring some level of dignity into the Oval Office, especially as a contrast against Trump. Showing yourself as a stateswoman or a statesman against him, actually something that Democratic voters actually want. So Clinton was hemmed in. She couldn't get down in the mud with him. Biden has the same problem. He can't get as dirty as Trump because he degrades himself by going at Trump on his level. On the other hand, one of the rules of political campaigning is do not let an accusation or a charge or whatever go unanswered. Don't let your political opponents define you. And Trump will demonize everybody who has anything bad to say about him, any kind of critique. So he will go out there and say terrible things about you. And if you don't respond in some way, it allows him to define you. So in 2016, Clinton was put in a very unusual position. We'd never seen this kind of political campaigning before, at least not in the modern era, and certainly not in terms of with the combination of social media and the way that Trump was able to harness social media and get a lot of free media, free advertising by the news coverage. This time around, we've got an entire group of white people who are alienated, but not necessarily natural Biden voters. And what those people need is permission to vote for Biden. What those people need are cover, justifications outside of policies for, because those people don't care about a public option. People who are like normal Republican voters aren't going to be swayed by free tuition. That's not where their hearts are. That's not where their political souls are, right? They're like patriots and for the military and all that other stuff. So that's where the Lincoln Project comes in. The Lincoln Project does two important things. One, it trolls Donald Trump, which is brilliant because it means Biden doesn't have to. Biden can stay above it all. Biden can still have his criticisms, but they can be ones based on policy differences and merit and, quoting Trump and showing how he's deficient in his own words. Right, so that's not, there's a way of criticizing your opponent without being petty. And there's something I should say about negative advertising too, that you should remember. Studies have shown that if, Trump would throw mud at Hillary Clinton and call her names like Crooked Hillary and do it over and over and over again, if you bring out a new attack against your political opponent that's effective, has some basis in reality or goes to a weakness that people already perceive that they have, then you will see your opponent's numbers drop. The danger is you will also see your numbers go down. Again, going outside of Trump, but just speaking generically about the effects of negative advertising. People generally don't want to see politicians bicker back and forth and be petty and personal. That said, it's effective. So they don't like it, but it works. They don't like these ads, but the ads have the intended effect of having people have a negative attitude or a negative view of your opponent. But they will also have a negative view of you for being a partisan bickering jerk. So when you go negative as a candidate, your name, I, Joe Biden, approve this message, or I, Hillary Clinton, approve this message, you're going to see your numbers go down. So the danger is you can't really attack your opponent when they're ahead in the polls with negative ads, because even though they'll go down, so will you. It's kind of better when you're close to your opponent, or even if you're a little bit ahead and you can push them a bit farther down and take a bit of a hit on your own positive ratings. But the Lincoln Project allows a political space or a political actor to troll Trump in a way that's completely plausibly deniable for Biden. Biden doesn't have to worry about getting his hands dirty. You know, like Rick Wilson, Steve Schmidt ran John McCain's campaign. Rick Wilson is a Republican consultant. George Conway is married to Kellyanne Conway. These guys are not DNC, you know? And we didn't have that in 2016. And I can't emphasize enough how this change of the political space on the right is really super effective. It's effective in a way that I don't think we're really going to appreciate until after the election and we compare Biden and Clinton. But the Lincoln Project is just doing something. They're trolling Trump, and they're putting together a series of ads with values that hit white, center, right, and right-leaning Republican voters because they understand. They're framing the anti-Trump argument from a Republican point of view. And for those Republicans who decided to give Trump a chance in 2016 thinking he would become more presidential, or who sat out 2016 because they didn't want to vote for Trump or for Clinton, they want to make it okay. They want to give people permission. Republicans permission to vote for a Democrat. And that is incredibly important work. It's not work that as Democrats we're naturally inclined to do because this is not how we think about the world. But I want to look a little bit here at this ad just to kind of give you a sense of how they frame these things. And then we'll also look, there is an entire channel called Republicans Voting Against Trump. I started to subscribe to it, and they just dump videos all the time. I'd want to do a qualitative analysis. I can't spell today. What is it for Biden? Yeah, let's look at that. I don't quite know. I have to look at my subscriptions. I think, no, dang it. Let me look at my subscriptions and see. I think I subscribed to them recently. So, and like I said, they dump a bunch of ads. Republican voters against Trump. There we go. Okay, we'll have a little look at that too. Okay, so part one. It is worth also, before I start, saying that Republicans have often, historically, out-messaged Democrats. They have. They're the kinds of people who do well with the Mad Men media type marketing message, commercial stuff, understanding candidates as products, all of that because that is their bailiwick. I mean, they think they're capitalists, so they think about things in this sort of way, and they think about voters as consumers. So they frame their messaging in terms of like a product sales pitch based on the values and the things that they think that their voters will move them. And so when we see the anti-Trump ads, at least for me, from the Lincoln Project, I find them moving, but I don't find them kind of as moving from a political values point of view. I mean, I think like on the stuff with patriotism and the soldiers, they have a point, but it's not the stuff that kind of really gets me worked up in the way that I think it does people on the right. So yeah, this Lincoln Project group, and I'll come then, I guess, to friend or foe before we go to Republicans against Trump. Let's look. This is a Boston Globe article, and they picked 12 of the political ads from the Lincoln group that they think were the most effective. So the first one was on reports that Trump knew about or was too incompetent to pay attention to reports that the Russians were paying the Taliban bounties for killing U.S. soldiers. So people on the left have a very complicated relationship with the U.S. military. I think it tends to give the impression that people on the left don't really care about soldiers as individuals, that people on the left tend to see those who go into the military as evil people or immoral people or not deserving of any kind of human compassion because of what the U.S. military does. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but that is kind of the impression I get of how the left talks about the U.S. military. That is completely different from how people on the right talk about the U.S. military. They talk about service. They talk about appreciation. There's a lot of there's a huge myth, right? There's a whole mythos built up around service and that goes beyond, like, and I'm not just saying like they acknowledge the service and the sacrifice. Like it is a whole like fairy tale that people buy into, and they tie this to their patriotism. The Lincoln Project understands that. They understand the myth of the servicemen and women of the U.S. military, and they understand the emotional connection that a lot of people have with those who have fallen. In fact, I watched something yesterday while I listened to the podcast of The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, and Steve Schmidt was talking to Lawrence O'Donnell about what happens when a service member dies, how their body or whatever remains of their body is accompanied the whole way home and the flag and everything. And Lawrence O'Donnell got emotional because Steve Schmidt was describing what happened to his cousin who was killed in Vietnam. So I mean, because I don't think people in the left tend to go into the military, we have fewer, I think, in the aggregate, connections to those who actually serve. And as a consequence, we don't, in our rhetoric, tend to draw on those things as much. But it is a very, very powerful human connection, especially for people who have lost family members or friends over time in when they were serving in the U.S. military. So the idea that the commander-in-chief would dismiss, ignore, not take seriously bounties on American soldiers by Putin is a deep betrayal. There's yesterday the hashtag Benedict Donald started to go around, and vote for vets. I can't remember the name of the group exactly. They brought out an ad calling him Benedict Donald. This is for people who have a value system around this military service. That is a very powerful emotional argument against Trump. And on the left, whether or not we feel it on the same level, it is important to understand why it is so effective and how it is pushing independents and former Republicans over to Biden. And that Biden is actually a safe pair of hands. It's seen as an acceptable alternative to these people, which is also another big important part of it. I think Bernie Sanders, personally, I think if Bernie Sanders were the nominee right now, he would be leading, but he would be leading by less. And he would be leading by less because even in the discussions of Black Lives Matter and Corona, Bernie would still be framing everything in terms of insurance companies and big banks and big pharma and all of this stuff in an economic framework. And the Republican voters just don't kind of go in for that. So I still think he would be leading. I just don't think he would be leading by as much as Biden is. Trump's relationship with Russia, that's another one. Again, hitting the right-leaning voters on his betrayal of America and American sovereignty and American integrity. There's an issue of leadership, truthfulness, again on foreign policy. Trump's failures in his rally on religion. These are things that the left don't really resonate, like on religion. We're more secular. I mean, there are parts of the Democratic Party base that are highly religious, but as the overall party goes, it's a pretty secular party. We're not constantly talking about God or the Bible and all that sort of things. But for the right, Trump on religion, that gets them. On the coronavirus response is aimed at seniors. Seniors tend to vote Republican, so discrediting Trump on an issue of life or death for seniors is a way to either erode Trump's support or shift people to Biden. On the Confederate flag, honestly, this is the one that surprises me the most. It really does. The fact that the Lincoln Project has come out so strongly against the Confederate flag, considering, as we talked about in the happy hour, 3 years ago, 50% of people opposed taking down, in 2017, 50% of those polled said they opposed taking down Confederate statues. To see that 180 and to see a right-leaning group lead on criticizing the Confederate flag is still a bit mind-blowing for me. So we see that presidential leadership, again, this is that whole notion of, respect, America being respected in the world. This is like sort of big lie that everybody's like, oh, watching America all the time globally. And they don't, but that's a perception. America is a leader in the world. And that is something that Republicans used to tout a lot. So their framing is very much, I think, aimed at those moderate whites or right-leaning white voters of a variety of ages in order to undermine Trump's credibility. Now, the question is, as I said in the initial part, and then I'll come over, once I get my initial premise out the way, then I'll come over to the chat and see what you guys have to say. What was I going to? I took a break to say when I was going to take a break, and now I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, it's gone. It's absolutely gone. Oh, friend or foe? Yeah. It's, for me, I have a very complicated set of perspectives on the Lincoln Group. One, they're incredibly effective at what they do. For whom they target, I think that they do a very good job. And they have, again, kind of two targets. One is trolling Trump down in the dirt with him, actually trying to go dirtier than him, if possible, in order to get under his skin, leaving Biden's hands clean. I can't stress how important I think that is. So in that way, they're like an insurgency group, they are doing tactical things against him, and it's working. They are literally changing the way that Donald Trump campaigns. You can't say that the Lincoln Project hasn't had an effect on the campaign when Donald Trump is now wasting money. His campaign is having to spend money in the DC media market, buying Trump ads on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, so that when Trump watches those when he's in the White House, he's not just seeing anti-Trump ads and Lincoln Group Project ads. There is no way that anyone in Washington, D.C. is going to vote for Trump in enough of a way to have an impact, or anyone in that media market. So he's literally just burning money. They are wasting money on Trump's ego. That's a win. That's a win. That's money he can't be spending in places he needs to spend it, like Arizona, because it's already been wasted in D.C. So on a tactical level, the Lincoln Project, #winning. So on the spending side of it, on getting Trump to waste his own money, they already have the win in their column. Next, he's reacting to them. He's annoyed because they go after him in such petty ways, and he's such a petty man. They did the ad on the ramp. And if you guys watched the happy hour last night, you know that Trump did a 6-minute discussion on walking down the ramp the next time he was at a rally. They are just absolutely, they understand how to get under his skin. And they get him off message. And in Tulsa, instead of spending the time talking about race relations, which is what the rally was supposed to be about, he ended up reacting to a Lincoln Project ad. They are playing him. They have him like a little marionette, ooh, let's find another way to poke the bear. Let's get him distracted. And the more that Trump is focused on going after the Lincoln Project's criticisms and going after defending his ego from these petty attacks, he's not attacking Biden. Trump's campaign is so frustrated because they haven't been able to define Biden in the same way they defined Clinton in 2016. Crooked Hillary, crooked Hillary, crooked Hillary. Well, when people were reporting at the Trump rally in Tulsa, I don't know about the more recent ones, that there was anti-DNC, anti-Democratic Party stuff on sale. There was still anti-Hillary stuff that people were hawking, shilling, trying to get off of their shelves at the Tulsa rally. But there isn't a cohesive anti-Biden message. Trump has known who his general election opponent has been since April. we're now in July, and he is blown this entire time that Obama used in the same, when he was up for re-election, to define Mitt Romney. Trump has completely wasted all that. Biden really, he's a known quantity. There are no new attacks coming. There's no new stuff with Ukraine that's going to, get through the coronavirus and the economic news right now. Trump is utterly failing to define Biden the way that he defined Clinton. This is a completely different race. And this is why Biden is, kind of baking in a 7, 8, 9, 10-point lead nationally. Phew. So before we get to Republican voters against Trump, let's take a look, because I know you guys have opinions. We'll see what they are. I'll go back a little bit. I think the last one I looked at was someone who asked about my opinion on socialism or capitalism. Again, as if there's a sort of preset package, here's the capitalist package and here's the socialism package. Even if we wanted to get to socialism in the United States, it's still going to be a process. It's still going to take time, so I don't even know what American socialism would end up looking like in the end, Let's see. He's got hairy legs? Who dat? Who's got hairy legs? Biden? Okay. Socialism would make the U.S. a less powerful nation and will halt the economic and technological growth. In your opinion, honestly, I don't know that I can't agree with that, because we don't know. I guess like I just said, I don't know what American socialism would look like. You can't kind of take 19th century socialism or 20th century socialism and just drop that in the 20th century anymore. We're just not living in those times. And I think what constitutes socialism, if you're talking about, worker-owned means of productions and some sort of mixed models where you have some companies that are worker-owned and some companies that are, done with private capital, and you've got a mixed model economy where both are competing and operating, I don't know that would I don't understand why that would necessarily halt economic or technological growth. There's also a case to be made that we should have better managed growth. It's the chasing of these short-term, quarterly increases on the stock prices that have led to irresponsible long-term fiscal planning on behalf of companies. They're so busy trying to keep their stockholders or shareholders happy by raising the share price that they're really not doing sustainable economic policies. So if you've got a company like Walmart where the majority of your employees get paid so little, they qualify for food stamps and publicly subsidized health care, what you actually have is a company that is using taxpayer funds to offset its labor costs rather than running a company where they can actually cover those costs themselves. That's a failing company. That's not an efficient company. If you can't afford, if you're making billions and you're subsidizing yourself with taxpayer money, how is that not a form of corporate socialism? And that's actually not corporate socialism, because socialism is worker-owned means of productions. But it's basically it's a failing. You're saying you don't have a good enough business model. You couldn't exist if you didn't have taxpayers, who are also your customers, paying twice. Walmart needs people to not only pay for their profits when they go to their stores, which I don't, but to buy their products, but then when those people pay their taxes, they're subsidizing their workers. How is that a good business? How is that not just completely stupid and wasteful? Lincoln Project, not a friend but a fellow traveler. I'm not an American, so I'm not a Democrat, but I'd keep distance, gives plausible deniability. I would agree that, I think I said this last time, but it's worth saying again. I don't buy into the maxim, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. You trust your friends. You let your guard down with your friends. And just because you share a common opponent with someone else doesn't mean you can trust them. So I would modify that to say the enemy of my enemy is my ally, in that we have a temporary shared goal where by combining our forces, we both get something we want. And maybe that's the start of the beginning of a trusting relationship, but you don't trust people just because you hate the same person. So I agree. I think the other thing I want to say that it actually kind of excites me about the Lincoln Project is that it shows me that the left in America is winning on identity politics. I know. Like, nobody's saying this, right? Nobody's talking about the fact that Trump is pushing people to the left. In 2015, Sargon and the Quartering and Andy Worski and all of these people kept shouting over and over and over, you're driving people to the right. You're making people right. The left is pushing people, to the right. And there's no one who's like consistently saying, that I see anyway, maybe my Twitter feed is inadequate, Trump has pushed a lot of white people to the left. Trump has really dropped the mask on the idea that you can be a Republican and not be racist. Trump is showing the white supremacy underpinning that lie of rugged individualism. And so when I see the Lincoln Project standing up for, standing against the Confederate flag and standing up for Black Lives Matter, when I see the Dixie Chicks dropping Dixie from their name and making a video that includes images of highlighting, preserving the life of Black trans women because they're being murdered. White people in America are moving to the left. Right? And the Lincoln Project is actually, for me, like a symbol of that. That on issues of racial equality, okay, we're going to set aside feminist issues because there's still an intersection with religion there that I think stops people on issues of abortion. But on issues of civil rights, on the issue of civil rights of people of color and also police brutality and the Black Lives Matter agenda, and on LGBTQIA issues, we're winning. We're winning those issues. Civil rights is now becoming, like, actually achieving the American goal of equality regardless of, based on the content of your character, not the color of your skin or your sexual orientation or your gender identity. Republicans, people who are formerly Republicans, are internalizing those values. We're winning that argument. And no one is giving the left any credit. All we do is we get crapped on by people who are much more extreme, saying no matter what we do, it's never enough because it's not what they want. If you don't give people Bernie's M for A and you go for a public option that's not quite there, but definitely a lot better than nothing, it's terrible. You're always going to have those people, I guess. So yeah, I mean, I think it is not, I don't trust the Lincoln Project. I am happy they exist. I am happy for them to take Republican money. I am happy for them to take conservative money. I'm happy for them to take any kind of right-wing money that they can get and spend it against Trump. Because that would have been money spent against a Democratic candidate in any other election year. Go Gadget PAC. go Gadget. A super PAC. Lincoln Project. But, should we trust them? No. I mean, and ultimately, they are allies. They're not friends. And we should... I personally celebrate the fact that they reject the Confederate flag. I celebrate the fact that they are embracing Black Lives Matter. We need people like that to be allies to get this stuff done. They're not always our enemy on every single issue. Now, on other issues, we will be opponents. But there's no reason to wholesale reject people who agree with you, who want the same things as you, just because, in my opinion, I'm very pragmatic again, you disagree on other things. Like, be tactically allied. You both win. We all win. Like, we're all going to win if Trump is out of office. Once we get Trump out of office and we clean up the mess, and then we're going to have the usual political fights. That's fine. But first, we need to get Trump out of office. Trump is a morality black hole. Absolutely. The problem is if you are always defending, it makes you look like the weaker candidate from an optics point of view. Yeah, that's true. I think at this point, Biden has been able to define Trump more than Trump has been able to define Biden. Trump doesn't really have credibility when he wants to attack Biden on China. You know how many tapes we have of him sucking up to the president of China? Trump isn't credible when he goes after Biden on being in cognitive decline, when he slurs his words like just literally yesterday. Can't say things out loud. So Biden is actually in a much more powerful position of critique because he can point to the times that Trump said it'll be gone by April, it'll be gone by summer, it's only a few people coming in from China, as he says it. Oh, I hate the way he says that word. he's able to point out Trump's failures with statistics that people see in their real lives because they're living in Florida where the COVID infection rates are spiking, or in Arizona, or in parts of California, or in parts of whatever in the South. So Biden is more on the attack, and Trump is defending and flailing, really, which is a good place for Biden to be. Not a friend, but a surefire ally. Immediate priority, getting rid of Trump. I agree, John. After a prominent Republican group like this going after Trump can only be beneficial to the cause of getting him out. I also want to say that, the Republican Party for a long time was dragged to the far right because of the Tea Party. And it's implicit. I mean, they were openly racist too, but not as open as Trump, if you want to say. And I think that that extreme racism, that extreme fascist kind of tendency inside the Republican Party has revealed the fact that it also left behind a lot of moderate white people who actually, like I said, they're becoming more progressive on issues of identity politics, and they're accepting the critiques, and they're finding it less painful to hear America criticized and realizing, because it is, for people who really love America and they're so patriotic, when you criticize America as a white supremacist nation, they feel emotional pain at that criticism. But it's easier, once you start as a white person, you drop the white privilege, and you drop the white good people. White people are good people, there's no institutional racism here that you're benefiting from or ignoring. You start to see the problem. It's easier to accept the criticisms. It's not as emotionally painful. And this is also why I think people are finally letting go of the Confederacy. They're not as emotionally attached after so many generations. Even being indoctrinated. There's only so long you can tell kids generation after generation about all people being created equal and America being the land of the free, and then have a white supremacist structure, and people go, oh, these two things I can live with the cognitive dissonance. And when people are presented with the cognitive dissonance of the white supremacist nature of power and the way that it's distributed in the United States, it has been since the Civil War. We've never really sorted this out. Seeing it makes the critiques less painful. And so people are more willing to accept it and wanting to have a more perfect union. And wanting a more perfect union becomes the patriotic thing. Okay, wasting money is Trump's specialty. Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. What American socialism might look like, the government market intervention that America used successfully in the post-war period. Well, I mean, again, you're talking about 20th century politics in a 21st century world. I don't know that you can just kind of pick up something from almost 100 years ago and dump it into the 21st century and go, these two things are going to be the same. I mean, manufacturing, just the structure of the economy, being a service economy, moving away from manufacturing, the role of digital media, globalization, all of these things have fundamentally changed the way that we do our economics. So I don't know that you can really do a one-for-one of mid-20th century socialism and say that's what it's going to look in the 21st century. You can have your opinion. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I don't see them being analogous or being transferable, as it were. I see Lincoln Project as an ally right now, but I wonder how long that will be. Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that. If Biden wins the presidency, will they turn around and start pulling stuff out against Biden? That's precisely my point. That's why they're not your friend. They still are going to be pro-capitalist. As I said, where I see the Lincoln Project really coming farther to the left than I've seen white conservatives before is on issues of identity politics. They are still capitalists, and they're going to stay capitalists. They still believe in the free market. They still believe that the free market is the best way to get things done, and all of that. Economically, I don't see any change coming out of the Lincoln Project. Where I see the change is on the dimension of identity politics. So, for me, again, you have to decide. For some people, if you're not about overthrowing capitalism, you're not left. And I don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think identity politics are actually incredibly important. And I also think I listen when Black activists and Black people say solving poverty doesn't fix racism. So, and so I don't expect the Lincoln Project will ever abandon their capitalist perspectives. But if they are moving left on identity politics issues and civil rights issues, again, feminist issues, religion problem there. But on civil rights issues, in the secular, sort of separate but equal civil rights equality under the law, they've moved a lot. Let's see. Lucky Wander's replying in the little conversation. Market intervention, forgot to mention, was basing it on Mazzucato's The Entrepreneurial State. She puts it into a much more modern context. Okay. Why shouldn't they turn against Biden? They are Republicans. They just don't want the party in the state it's in right now. Yeah, I think that's completely right, Zaz. There is, I think, a thirst on the right for a center-right conservative, small c, conservative party. I think that is precisely the gap that the Lincoln Project and people who agree with them think is missing. I think for a lot of, you call it socially moderate or even socially progressive Republicans who are economically conservative, fiscal right-wingers. All right, these are people who live in urban areas. They're let me give you a profile of the kind of person I'm talking about. It's somebody who went to business school or who grew up in a Republican family, or they're quite religious, but they also believe in that kind of Christian idea that everyone is equal and everyone is deserving of love. And I think, there's a whole lot of BS that goes into this white Christian Republican patriotic worldview that allows them to ignore systemic racism. But so they have these sort of Republican groundings. They come out of a Republican family, or they go into an industry like business or marketing, something to do with money, finance, right? But they went to university, and so they're quite cosmopolitan. They live in urban areas, so they interact with a lot of people. They have friends who are gay, right? Or maybe even family members, or maybe they themselves are gay. And maybe they're like, there's very few Black Republicans, I think, who qualify this. I'm really talking about white people here. But they also have friends of different backgrounds. They're not threatened by difference. They're not threatened by cosmopolitanism, but they're economically conservative. So they want to actually see a world where those kinds of opportunities, the kinds of barriers to individual opportunity and meritocracy and, make it individual effort and achievement. They want to see a country where anyone can start their own business. All right, this is probably brings it out the best. This is how I kind of think of these Republicans. They want an America where, an African American woman, a Black woman, a Black man, anyone could wake up and go, you know what, I'm going to start my own business today. And they wouldn't have a problem if, all things being equal, they wouldn't have a problem securing a loan from a bank or finding a way to get a capital investor to start their business going. That, they would also benefit from the kinds of relaxation of government regulations to help with their business, expand it so that they can kind of create their own wealth and generate jobs for other people. This is kind of like the mindset I see them having, right? And that's why they're left on identity politics, because they buy into the whole equality under the law and all people are created equal. But they're never going to be socialists. There's no place for them in the Republican Party right now. Because you've got the religious fundamentalists, the evangelicals, who are just, rolling back trans rights, rolling back gay rights. Then you've got the white supremacists that Trump is appealing to with his open racism and his dismissiveness and his demonization of anyone. And they don't feel like they have a home. So right now, they are voting tactically. These people aren't going to become Democrats. But they are also, if we get those kinds of Republicans elected, you're going to see a lot more policies that are socially progressive on identity politics issues getting through. And then maybe those people are going to be more open to discussions of left politics. So here's a way I was thinking about it before the show. You know how people like sort of Peter Coffin and Vosh and others on the far left want to make their content appealing to far-right racist white populists. They want to find a nexus of economic grievances, right? They want to get the kind of anti-corporate, anti-global conspiracy of a certain religious group taking over the world that's keeping me poor framework of the alt-right white populism. and then just kind of tweak it a bit to go, no, actually the problem is capitalism. Like, all your other things about, like, all that is fine, but just instead of, like, being racist about it, just be anti-capitalist about it, and then you'll be left-wing white populism, right? And they want to say, okay, well, if I get in all of these racist white guys, because predominantly it's guys, it's cis white guys, if we get all these racist white guys on economics, then maybe we can convert them away from being racist, right? So that's happening on the one side. And then what I see happening here is that there's a bunch of Republicans and a bunch of like people like me saying, hey, there's a whole nexus of identity politics on issues of civil rights and equality under the law that we all believe in as Americans. So if you come a little bit left on issues of identity politics and you see the structural racism and you see the way that capitalism exploits people, see, if you're left on making sure that people who are LGBTQ or, you know, what civil rights issues and justice, there's equality, then maybe you'll be more open to the economic arguments. It's kind of a weird time that we're living in right now. Okay, so the Lincoln Project, Frankenstein, Trump admin, the monster. Yeah. Okay, I've been going an hour now, and I want to warm up my coffee, and then how about we take a little look-see? In the next bit, I need a break, stretch my legs, whatnot. We will take a look at these Republican voters against Trump, and we'll do a little bit of a qualitative, we call it narrative analysis, or maybe discourse analysis, where we're going to examine we're going to take a step back and look at the kinds of themes, values, framing that people choose in order to be persuasive to other people who are like them. So a little bit of political studies analysis. Yeah, let's do that. Let's come back in 5. I will give you guys some good music to listen to in the meantime. And I can actually turn that up a little bit now, I think. Yeah, so I'll see you guys in like 5 minutes. Does that sound okay to you? I love blues music. I really, really do. I love it. I think it's so awesome. It's groovy. That's it. I've realized listening to a lot of hip hop now, how much I actually like a really heavy bass line. That's usually the kinds of songs I find myself attracted to, are the ones that have really cool heavy bass lines to them, like thump, 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 and kind of groovy and a bit dirty, gritty like that. Dum, 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 that kind of thing. All right. Yeah. So let's look a little bit. Let's take a little trip, and by trip I mean trip. We're gonna visit an alien land to me, and that's how Republicans think. It's not a totally alien land, but to be fair, where I can be dispassionate in the analysis of British politics and even have slight empathy for the positions taken up by voters with whom I might on policy disagree, I find that process much more difficult when applied to my fellow Americans. I find my fellow Americans, I have much less patience and empathy and compassion and tolerance for them, for people on the right. Maybe it's just because I'm so mad about how things have gone and the way that, their party has screwed things up. But let's look at it from a political analysis. Let's look at it from a tactical point of view. Was it on MSNBC? Somebody had, or I was watching an interview. I can't remember now. I'm sorry. I'm going to tilt my camera a little bit more. There we go. David Frum was talking about Republicans against Trump, I think, and the whole point of this movement, and also the point of the Lincoln Project. And it's really, really powerful and insightful and important for us to remember, and it's this. Republicans, the people that they are targeting, these former Republicans and even current Republicans, they need permission to vote for Biden. They need role models of people who are like them and feel like them and think like them, who are saying, I'm going to vote for Biden. And that's incredibly important because we tend to trust people who have the same value systems that we do. So, Republicans always, they've had a much narrower group to mess around with. They pretty much only really ever had to appeal to white people, and they are really good at manipulating their psychology because they've been practicing it for a long time. Whereas Democrats have to cast a really wide net, and so our messaging can kind of get a bit blunted in being generic. But if we let's just look at the kinds of people who are making these ads. Republican voters against Trump are looking for people who will voluntarily send in videos of themselves explaining why they are not voting for Trump or that they're voting for Biden in this next election. And it's all Republicans. So, we're going to see overwhelmingly white people. We're going to see overwhelmingly guys, because when you look at the Republican base, this is the core of their base. And if people in this base, are saying, you know what, I'm voting for Biden, that, as David Frum pointed out, gives permission for other people to vote for Biden. So what is Lucky Wonder says, is it wrong I find that the people who advocate most about my freedoms need permission to vote for someone else? It's more the put yourself in their shoes a little bit. What would it take for me, as a lifelong Democratic voter, a person who worked for the Democratic Party, a person who volunteered for Democratic candidates at every level of government, nonpartisan, people who are Democrats who were running as nonpartisans. Myself, that was, I ran for office as a nonpartisan, but I was obviously associated with the Democratic Party. State Assembly, State Senate, Governor, U.S. Senate, Congress, President, all the way up. What would it take for me to vote for a Republican? I actually used to joke. I don't really I would say, I could see myself, dating someone from a different ethnic background, or even, someone of the same gender identity as me, or someone of, who was religious when I'm an atheist, but I couldn't date a Republican. That was my one thing. I can't seriously see myself ever having the kind of deep emotional connection with somebody who had Republican values. It would just like they would be an alien to me. I couldn't relate to them. So how bad would the Democratic candidate have to be? And what would a Republican candidate have to look like for me to vote for a Republican? That's what they're facing. That's what Republicans are facing right now. If they feel like their party left them, and they voted against Hillary Clinton, and they still have some leftover misogyny, and they are all the kinds of pro-life, and they whatever, care about judges, care about our military, all that sort of stereotypical Republican policy framing, what would it take? So, hey, Roy Katz. Yeah, so let's just have a look, discourse analysis, before we go into any one video, because textual analysis of like a transcript is way more work. But let's look at how they pulled out, like what kind of thumbnail, what kind of phrase did they pull out in order to be the hook for a white guy who's like not sure about Biden but is fed up of Trump, who comes to this website. Trump betrayed his oath to the Constitution. That was from 17 hours ago. They're putting up vets. See, this is also an establishment of credibility. If you have people in the military saying it's okay to vote against the commander-in-chief, that is another level of permission that makes it easier to either not vote for Trump or vote for Biden. Former Army officer, Trump is the opposite of the best president for the military. Let's see. Republican immigrant. You see how they're kind of using these identity politics? Do you see how they're using identity politics? Here's a vet. You should believe them because they're a vet. They have an expertise on this. You can trust them because they have your values too. Now a Republican immigrant. All right? I'm a Reagan Republican, not a Trump Republican. A Republican veteran. Trump is no friend of veterans. I love this. I love the way that they're employing identity politics. This is white people identity politics. For all the Ben Shapiro stuff, like, oh, you're using identity politics. They do too on the right. We just don't call it out as identity politics as often. Republican veteran. It feels like we're a Russian puppet state. 2016 Republican voter. I was wrong. Republican voter. Trump isn't fit to be a pimple on Reagan's butt. We need to go back and watch that. Oh, here's a woman who might be up for a category of Karen. Indiana Republican. He is costing thousands of lives. This is the first time we've seen a woman, I want to point out. And if you look at Trump's base, where his strength is, his biggest core support is with white men. So this is reflective of the group that needs the permission to abandon Trump, abandon the GOP. 2016 Trump voter. Putting Trump in office was a terrible mistake. Republican. The GOP is no longer the party of Lincoln. As if it ever was. I mean, it hasn't been the party of Lincoln for decades, but some white people are just waking up to that fact. And, better late to the party than never, but Republican evangelical. Trump doesn't represent me at all. I want to listen to one guy, one woman, and one event. I kind of want to do one of each. We'll just do a little taster of these videos. GOP voter. Vote for Biden to save the country. Let's continue on our gammon scroll. Gammon, I'm kind of... I shouldn't be. These people, I mean, they're voting the right way. I shouldn't make fun of them. Former Republican. We need to bury Trumpism. GOP voter. I'm voting for Biden this year. Illinois Republican. Trump is putting his own interests ahead of the country. Former pastor? Is that what it said? I lost it. 87-year-old Republican, Virginia Republican, lifelong Republican. Former pastor. Trump is playing on our fears to get reelected. Mississippi Republican. I don't like the direction things are going. GOP voter on Trump. He's such a liar and a bully. Right, so you're starting to see, I mean, this is such from a white person. Can you see how this is such a white person's perspective? All of these are about things white people care about. And people, I said depressingly on Twitter, I said people are depressingly selfish. Like, they care about themselves and what they care about and what they want. And it's our job, as political analysts, to try to map that onto what the candidate is offering. If we expect people to vote for noble things, we're expecting too much. All right, so let's do a little sampling here of some of these. I'm gonna go. Let's see. All right, let's hear from Bob from Pennsylvania, who regrets voting. I'll have to get my headphones on now. For Trump in 2016. Let's see what kind of permission Bob is going to give former Trump voters, how he's going to frame this. So usually what I expect is for them to say something along the lines of, they're going to establish their credibility, their credentials. They're going to establish their Republican credentials, saying, I was a Republican voter, or I voted for a Republican since, or something along the lines of explaining how they are actually like true Republicans. And then some sort of event, maybe they talk about how they related to the 2016 election, again, as framing. Like maybe they voted for Trump and now they're going to set that up in contrast with what they're going to do this time. Or they're going to talk about why they didn't vote for Trump last time and why they're going to do the same or different now. And then in their narrative, there will be some sort of tension or drama. And then they're going to talk about how they resolved that tension or drama and now how they're in a better place in terms of where they're going to vote for, like how they reconciled themselves to the their decision to vote for Biden or to at least not vote for Trump. And the reason, I'm not just making this up, I have an entire article that I published on people explaining their vote choices in Britain. And what we found is that regardless of partisanship, when people talk about their vote choices, they tend to have a similar narrative structure that they rely on, they use over and over. People from different parties will use the same structures to tell the similar stories. So just a little bit about my research. What we found is that people who didn't have any drama, like, hey, I'm going to, I've always voted for Labor, I'm going to vote for Labor this time. Their stories were basically like not very dramatic. Like, I've always voted for Labor, or I'm a longtime Labor voter, or I decided I was going to vote for Labor before the election even started. And then they just kind of justify what they did or explain, rationalize, their decision. The people whose stories were the most interesting are the people who were conflicted. And in these conflicted vote choice narratives, they tend to start with like a little bit about the background, and then they introduce the dilemma, and then they might talk a little bit about the dilemma itself, and then they talk about how they came to a resolution of their dilemma, and then they kind of do a coda where they restate something like, and that's why I decided to vote for the Conservatives, or that's why I decided to vote for Labor. So that's my prediction. We'll see whether or not it carries over. I've watched a couple of these, but I haven't watched, you can see I haven't watched any of the ones that we're going to watch now. So it's not like I already pre-watched these and I'm just trying to make myself look smart. And in case you're wondering if you want to read that article, because it's a fascinating article, it's called I Went With What I Always Did. Yeah, hold on. I think that's what it was called. It's a couple of years ago. Winters and Carvalho. Went with what I always do. That's what it is. This is it. I went with what I always do. A qualitative analysis of Cleggmania and vote choice in the 2010 British general election. So if you're interested in reading my research, you can check it out there. All right, let's see if now watch the first person doesn't do any of that. Which one did I say that I picked? Oh yeah, here we're gonna hear from Bob. Oh, you know what? You guys actually need to hear it because I've muted the desktop audio because the desktop audio also plays the main music back and you get this echoey weird effect if you have both of them running. I've got the closed captions on. I'm just going to leave those on in case, unless anybody else has objections, but this way you're more precise, I guess, in what he said. Okay, 1 minute and 42 seconds. Let's see what Bob from Pennsylvania has to say.
Hello, my name is Bob, and I voted for Donald Trump in the last election. Saying that out loud, admitting that now, is rather difficult. It's the start of an embarrassing apology to my wife, my friends, and my family, especially my children. I was born and raised in southwestern Pennsylvania and moved to central Pennsylvania, which is now home. I was raised in a Republican, Fox News watching family.
This is the credentialing. Right. So he introduced himself, he explained the dilemma, and now he's giving his bona fides, I'm a real Republican. I'm telling you, these are really formulaic. And it's because this is how people tell stories. It's not that these people are dumb or they're being given a script. This is how we tell our stories. There's narrative tropes that we rely on, maybe unconsciously, in order to explain ourselves to ourselves and to other people.
In the last election, even though I'd already changed my party affiliation from Republican to Independent, I felt as though a strong Republican CEO could lead our economy and our military. I thought I was making a logical decision and not an emotional one like I thought I saw others doing.
But
I was wrong.
Yep.
I'm recording this after the failure of his first rally, and I believe the failures will continue. However, this is no longer just about the president. This is now about every elected official who enabled and defended this president. Those soulless elected officials are who must be sent home from Washington and from each of our states and local communities.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the Republican machine fears this now. They're slowly distancing themselves from this president in the hopes they will be reelected. We cannot let that happen. It was hard for me to change because it required difficult introspection and growth. Change like this could lead to very difficult discussions and losing friends and family. But that's okay. It feels good now. I get it. I am truly very sorry. I made a mistake.
Holy cow. That's seriously, I mean, I just want you to think about how much it would take for you to make that video. How much crow you have to eat, how much humble pie, how much you actually have to be pushed emotionally to get to that point. This is why these testimonials are powerful, and this is why I'm saying Trump is pushing people to the left. This guy's talking about doing difficult introspection and growth, and that it's okay, and that it feels good. He didn't give any reasons. No, he kind of did the apology at the beginning. Kind of sort of set that up a little bit. So it didn't follow the script entirely, but it's more of a my arc is more of an archetype. So each one has to be. We could take a look at the article, but not every story will have every element, but they generally follow that. So it's not a perfect prediction, but I still think he did a lot of the boxes. Let's see. I'm trying to what's the should we do Trump isn't fit to be a pimple on Reagan's butt? So my prediction for this is I'm a real Reagan Republican back when Reagan had a good kind of Republicanism that made me feel good about myself. He's not going to say this, but that's where he's going to go for. But Trump is so far away from that now that it's not who I was. But we'll see.
Hello, my name is Michael.
Whoa, Michael, you're really, really quiet. I'm going to have to turn you right the way up there. All right.
Hello, my name is Michael, Washington State here. My father came over here from Holland in 1923 with my grandfather when he was 6 months old, grew up during the Depression, joined the military in 1939, fought in the Pacific in World War II, was wounded, got malaria, spent 2.5 years in the hospital in Memphis. I also had 3 uncles that fought in World War II, 2 in the Pacific and 1 in Europe fighting against the Nazis.
Again, bona fides. Here, this is why you can believe me. This is my background to prove I'm speaking as a Republican from a Republican point of view. It's a very common opening for these testimonials.
And I'm glad they're not alive to see what Donald Trump has done to this country. It's shameful. And the way he talks about honorable veterans like John McCain and Gold Star families, the way he's allowing the greatest generation to die off like cattle in old folks' homes, VA hospitals, with his disregard of older life, except for himself. It's just unbelievable. I didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2016. I damn sure ain't going to vote for him again this year. I'm going to vote for Biden.
Probably here now, I would predict, comes a justification of why they're going to vote for Biden.
He's a shameful man. He's dishonest. He's a liar. He's a cheat.
Trump, of course.
He's evil. He's dangerous. And as far as him calling himself a great president, he wouldn't make a pimple on the backside of Ronald Reagan's butt. I'm sorry for using that language, but it's the truth. And I hope everybody out there comes to their senses and votes this man out of office.
It's interesting to me that they aren't really spending a whole lot of time, at least in the ones we looked at so far. Biden is just a sort of acceptable other category. He's just sort of like this. He's not Trump. And the fact that Biden is so acceptable as a candidate to these people, that he can kind of just be, look, he's not everything I want, but he's not Trump, and I feel safer with Biden, is huge. I know it won't make left progressives happy because it's not a policy-based thing. But given the two-party system, don't hate the player, hate the game, this is what we need to get out to make sure we don't have a fascist again in the White House. So Biden, all he has to be is acceptable to them. He doesn't even have to be perfect. He just has to be tolerable. And I think, again, he was a good pick as a Democratic candidate because these guys, unlike Clinton or unlike Obama, the latent misogyny and latent racism, they don't have those obstacles with Biden. And that's just where American voters are. Let's see. Let's go down. If anyone sees anyone, if you want to shout out any names, like here we got Ryan or Robert, I'll try to remember. I'll try to pick them. Chase worked for the GOP, but he knows Biden is the patriotic choice. All right, so let's. This is GOP voter Chase here. Let's see what Chase has to say.
My name is Chase Slaughter. I'm a lifelong Republican and a lifelong resident of the state of Indiana.
Again, I'm just pointing this out structurally in the narrative of bona fides. Going to establish I'm a Republican. Here is my credentialing to prove my Republican, plausibility, credibility.
Just like being a Hoosier for multiple generations, I am also a Republican for multiple generations. I suppose that the first time that I actively thought about politics, the first time that I decided I was a Republican was in the late 1990s when I was still in middle school and the Lewinsky affair became public. And I remember thinking how crass and unpresidential and crude Bill Clinton was.
You see what they're doing in their narrative? What Chase is doing here? He's basically going to tie, I was a Republican because I was repelled by the immorality of Bill Clinton. And then he's going to transfer it over to Trump. That's what I'm predicting. That's what I'm predicting in terms of where the narrative arc is going.
For having an extramarital affair. I kind of wish we could go back to those days.
Back when life was simple and I could just demonize the left as these sexually, whatever. Yeah. I'm not laughing at like the whole thing about power dynamics. It's kind of weird to me for people to be nostalgic about the Clinton years.
I went to college and studied political science and history. I first became active in Republican politics in 2004. I was active in the Mitch Daniels campaign for governor that year. If I were to point to my political heroes, it would be people like Mitch Daniels and Richard Lugar from Indiana. It would be people like Mitt Romney and John McCain. I served as a Republican precinct committeeman beginning in 2005 while I was still in college.
Lots of credentialing.
I continued to serve as a Republican precinct committeeman until this year when I resigned my seat because I said I could not in good conscience have my name associated with Donald Trump.
So now we're probably going to get an explanation of the breaking point.
After college, I worked for the Republican Party for 3 years before joining my family's business. even after that time, I continued to be a Republican donor and a Republican fundraiser and a Republican campaign volunteer and a delegate and a precinct committeeman and all those things. The first president that I voted for was George W. Bush. I voted for John McCain. I voted for Mitt Romney. But by the nomination of Donald Trump, I realized that the Republican Party that I so loved, the party of civility and decorum and leadership, was dead. I don't think that I ever left the Republican Party. I think the Republican Party left me. Because the Republican Party today, as I see it, is the party of hypocrisy. They are people who called for Bill Clinton's impeachment a generation ago, and rightly so. But when Donald Trump does the same thing or worse, they say he's changed, or they call it locker room talk or whatever. They are people who hatefully condemn monogamous same-sex marriages, but blindly worship a thrice married adulterer.
You see what I mean? Like, about them moving left on identity politics? This guy was like a lifelong Republican, but he's like, I hate the way that you're going to dismiss loving same-sex marriages for a guy who's a 3-time, married adulterer. We're winning on that. We're winning on civil rights. Okay.
They are people who scream that they are pro-life, but don't care about immigrant children at the border. They don't care about poor children.
And this is where actually, like, if you're not an evangelical Christian willing to sell out your soul for judges, this is kind of where, like, the I'm a good person, I'm a good Christian, Jesus loves everybody kind of thing actually helps on the identity politics issues. It's, you can't be a good Christian and, like, it's like the whole love the sinner or hate the sin kind of thing and all that. Like, people are rejecting that, and they're actually, like, using their religious morality to justify civil equality in a government sense, and caring about poor kids as being part of pro-life. I mean, again, I just think that we're winning then on those issues because they're actually connecting with other people who are different from them on a human level. That's great for me. Like, I feel like that's the left winning.
Children, they don't care about minority children. They are a people who voted in Republicans 3 decades ago for fear of the deficit, and now that the deficit has grown by trillions of dollars under Donald Trump, they don't care. That's what really gets me, is the hypocrisy of the Republicans. That's
that second time hypocrisy has come up in the 3 videos we watched. So that would be something that if I was coding this, I would definitely look for intolerable cognitive dissonance in the hypocrisy of the Republican Party from what people who vote for Republican, who they think they are in terms of their morality versus what they're voting for. And it becomes too much. And so they have to make a choice. And hypocrisy seems to be something that ultimately turns these guys away.
Republican Party. Donald Trump has always been a con man. He's always been a racist, a chauvinist, a misogynist, a xenophobe, a homophobe. But now the Republican Party, the party that I have so loved and joined because they were the party of civility and decorum and leadership.
I'm just going to put a little message, like a little asterisk here. Karl Rove and the Republicans in the early 2000s went around deliberately creating referenda at the state level in statewide elections on same-sex marriage in order to gin up homophobia and gin up hatred of gay people's equality and get more Republicans and more homophobes and more bigots out to the polls in order to win another elections. So this guy's narrative about the civil decorous Republican Party of decorum, this doesn't map onto the reality. But it's also important to realize it doesn't, like, for him, that is his reality. That is the narrative that he lives in. And that is the distinction between what he perceives of himself and what the Republican Party stands for today. That is the breaking point that's allowing him to walk away. So the narrative he's painting is a narrative from his perspective. It's not factually accurate, but continuing.
has allowed this con man to take over our party and our country. I don't think that history will look kindly upon Donald Trump, but I think it will look less kindly on the people that stood idly by and let him get away with it. And I am specifically talking to my fellow Hoosier Mike Pence. The only way to return our party and our country to civility, to decorum, to leadership, to the party and country of morals and ethical fortitude is to vote for Joe Biden.
You have to vote for Joe Biden to rescue. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, this to me is amazing. Like it's as a political scientist, I love this stuff. And one, because it's data. Two, it's such a great insight into people's psychology and their own narratives. But also for me, it just, again, shows the way that the left's discourse about human dignity and equal rights is mapping onto and taking over the kind of traditional Republican narratives about the American dream. Like, you can't both have an America where you say that everyone has equal opportunity while denying people marriage equality. And we're winning on this. You know, we're winning on this with Chase here and other people.
A vote for Joe Biden is the most patriotic thing that an American or a Republican can do in 2020.
Damn. Okay. This is the kind of stuff, like I said, that David Frum, when he, was it David? Yeah, I think it said David Frum. People need permission. People who have these doubts need role models and permission to do what their heart is telling them, because voting for a different party is the most, like, from my own research, voting for a different party takes a lot of it's a huge psychological burden. It's doing something outside of your comfort zone. So let me explain. You can read this again in my article. I went with what I always did, or whatever the name of it was I showed you earlier. We had two conservatives and one Labor person. All three were longtime party voters of the party that they identified with in 2010, and all three of them were thinking about voting for the Liberal Democrats for the first time. And in the focus group, so we talked to them about, they presented themselves as serious, like, yes, I'm very open to another party. I'm kind of dissatisfied with my party. I like what the Liberal Democrats have to say. I actually like Nick Clegg. This was before the coalition. I like the way that Nick Clegg talks about things. I think that we need a change. And all three of them, on the day, if you would have polled them the day before the election, they probably would have told you that they were going to vote for the Liberal Democrats. The day of the election, when they were faced with their ballots, now, of course, it's a small sample, because, you know, you have to get a subset of people who are longtime party members and who are open to another party. But it was interesting to me that people of different parties all did the same thing. When actually confronted with the opportunity to vote for a different party than they'd always voted for, they all defaulted back to their original party identification. Like, they gave different reasons. The conservatives like, well, in the end, I decided the person who was conservative was going to win in my district anyway, so I went with what I always did. That's where the line from the article came from. Another person said, I thought about it, but I realized Liberal Democrats couldn't win nationally, so I just voted conservative. And the Labor person said, I thought about it and which outcome would make me happier, a Labor win or a Liberal Democrat win, and I realized a Labor win would make me happier, so I voted for the Labor candidate. It is a huge psychological burden to vote, especially like in the States, where there's not, like, when you have in the UK, sometimes the Liberal Democrats seem like a more left version of Labor, of the Conservatives that make it acceptable to Labor voters, at least in the past, 2010 time. And on the other side, they seem a little more left than the Conservatives, so they might seem acceptable to Labor voters tactically. So they kind of occupy this weird space depending on which marginal district, which, you know, the race that they're in. But in the States, it's either Republican or Democrat. So you have to go 180. You got to vote for a party you've always hated before. It was a bigger psychological burden, which is why these videos are so fascinating. I agree with Nick. Yes, of course, I remember the I agree with Nick debates. I was doing focus groups during those debates that night. Okay, let's have a listen to a woman, because women's concerns, like there's a lot of military stuff you'll find with men's narratives, because men's framework for evaluating things because of socialization is quite different. You're going to see more of a, when you talk about mommy and daddy issues, spending, military defense, law and order, whereas women, because of their experiences and their value system, are more likely to be carers or have experience of taking care unpaid labor with children or elderly parents. And so their framework for politics and what they need, what's important to them, is a little bit different. So I don't know if we go Cheryl here. All these white guys. Let's see. Oh, how about Denise here? Boy, was I wrong about Trump. Let's see what Denise has to say. This will be the last one. As fun as this is, I'm going to wrap it up because it's Sunday, and I did a debate on Friday night, and I did a 3-hour show with Kevin last night, and this is going to go for 2 hours. So we're done after this. So I will go through if you have any comments, I'll go through those, and then we'll wrap it up after Denise here. This is only 2:20, so it should go pretty quick.
My name is Denise, and I live in the state of Nevada. I did vote for Donald Trump in 2016, but there's absolutely no way that I could vote for him again this year. I worked in federal law enforcement for more than 30 years, and I have held conservative political values my entire adult life.
Bona fides, credentials. They all start the same way. Here's why you can believe that I'm a Republican. Just pointing it out because that's what we do in political analysis.
I knew that Trump had severe character flaws when I voted for him, but I voted for him because I believed in his vision for the country, and I also thought it would be a really good idea to have a non-career politician as the president of the United States.
Again, I'm going to predict here, but here are all the reasons. Here you can believe me. This is why I voted for Trump last time. And now there's going to come in the narrative the dilemma or the inciting incident or something that changes the direction of the story.
Even though I knew he had character flaws, I actually truly hoped and believed that he would exercise some maturity and some sense of dignity as the President of the United States. I also truly believe in our system of government, and I thought that he would surround himself with smart people and would listen to them and take their advice in governing the country. But boy, was I wrong. Actually, all that Trump has shown us time and time and time again.
So now this is the explanation of how she reached the conclusion, this sort of boy was I wrong, and now this is the how I learned I was wrong part of it, like the justification for the dilemma
is that he is ignorant. He's an extreme narcissist, and he really only cares about wealth, power, and his own personal image. Really, to put the icing on the cake, so to speak, is his entire lack of leadership during this corona pandemic. He is either too ignorant, too stupid to understand what the situation is, or he simply doesn't care. Instead, he acts time and time again like he could bully himself through any situation. Under normal circumstances, I would never vote for Biden. Quite frankly, I don't think he's a good candidate, but we cannot afford to reelect Donald Trump. And I think that Trump is definitely a threat to our democracy. So we really just need to band together and vote him out of office, because I think the only way that we have a chance for our democracy to survive is not to reelect Donald Trump this year. My name is Denise.
Yeah, so it's basically, it's interesting. These videos don't spend a lot of time justifying Joe Biden or even talking up to Joe Biden, or defending Joe Biden. What it seems from watching quite a lot of these is that Biden is just not so dangerous, not so offensive, not a socialist threat, that people see him as a better alternative to Donald Trump. And I said, like, pretty much nobody is excited. Like, there are very few people who are excited, like, woo, like Joe Biden, the way that people fell in love with Obama, let's say. Or that some people like myself were very excited about the opportunity to see women's representation in the White House. Nobody's fallen in love with Joe Biden, but you don't have to fall in love with a candidate to think that they are the best option and that they will do a much better job than your opponent. Yeah, and I mean, the fact is, you're right. I see Brett Suck saying, I voted for a fascist and was surprised when he started doing fascist things. Yeah, it's the whole leopard ate my face party voting. Precisely. I mean, white people gave Donald Trump a white people pass. They're like, yeah, you seem pretty crap, but, I'm going to trust you anyway because you're a white guy who ran a business and I think you're going to be a grown-up. And now that's definitely bit them in the butt. And they have had to eat a lot of crow. But again, I want to emphasize that this, how much psychological stress, de-stress, overturning of a long-held personal conviction it takes for people to get from voting for Republican to saying, I'm going to vote for Biden. And even if it's, I'm voting for Biden because he's not Trump, in an election that doesn't matter. And in an election, it just matters how many votes you get. Doesn't matter why you get them. Doesn't matter if people like you. None of that matters. All that matters is the raw numbers at the end of the day in your state. Who gets 50% plus one? That's it. So from a Biden perspective, this is great. So I wanted to point this out because we tend on the left to be really I don't want to over egg the pudding or overgeneralize here. My experience in talking to a lot of progressives who are really upset with the choice between Biden and Trump, they're upset because, this isn't what I want. These aren't the policies I want. What I want for the country is to the destruction of capitalism. What I want for the country is fill in the blank. And the difference, the reason I think I butt heads with a lot of people and why I'm called a neoliberal and why I'm called a Republican and why I am crapped on and I'm not part of BreadTube and why I'm not considered, left enough for a lot of people is because I understand what Americans will vote for. And the fact is that if we had a Bernie Sanders, I don't think you'd have this many people being willing to go out there and say, I'm going to vote for Bernie Sanders because he is a flaming socialist in terms of American politics. I want progressives in America to win, but we don't win in the American system with the median voter we have in our left-right political space in America with revolution. We need people on the left to keep pushing the party and pushing America. We've seen progress on M4A. We've seen progress on trans rights. We've seen progress on marriage equality. By the way, marriage equality, Biden was out in front of Obama. Biden was the one who was saying, yes, I'm for same-sex, both Barack and I are supporting this, right? Biden is the most progressive, policy for policy. He is the most progressive Democratic candidate ever, and I think that's good. But you also have to still be electable. There's no point in having great policies and losing. And if that means you have to do things at a slower pace, or you don't promise people 100% of what they want the first time around, it's worth winning and getting power and getting closer to that goal than to say, if I can't get 100% of what I want nothing. And so I generally advocate for what I think I can get. I generally advocate for, I am poll-led. If you would have told me 2 years ago, Confederate statues is going to be a winning political issue, I would have been very skeptical because the polling at that point would have shown that. America's changed now. And America's changed now. Let's go. Let's keep pushing this issue of Confederate flags, because now the people are ready to hear this. Just like with same-sex marriage when it flipped, not nearly as quickly as Confederate statues in public places. But once we got the steam, we made the arguments, we got farther and farther. And so, yeah, I want electable candidates, because that's how we can actually make progress. And as a consequence, I get a lot of hate, and I get thrown a lot of shade for not being a good enough leftist. But at the end of the day, if I win on the policies, I don't really care. If we win on making progressive policies more accessible, more widely acceptable, then I don't care. We've got Republicans here using identity politics defending immigrant children and the dignity of same-sex couples and the integrity of their marriages. We're winning. We're winning. It might be slower than you want, I grant. But, that's my perspective. I'm not sure why some people don't think we can both tear down capitalism and vote for Biden so Trump gets out of office. I don't know either. I don't. I think it's because I think for some people they just really, really, really wanted Bernie. And so it doesn't matter that Biden has adopted Warren's position on tuition-free post-secondary education. It doesn't matter that he's embraced a public option, which is an M for A, because M for A has this whole thing where they're going to eliminate all private insurance companies, which most people don't want in the United States, but they do want choice in terms of, I want to choose to be able to go into Medicaid, Medicare, whichever one it is, Medicare as a program as opposed to a private insurance company. That does win, and that gets us to our goal. So I think the problem with the people who are that far left is that they're letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. That their attachment to getting 100% of what they want is getting in the way of them getting 65% of what they want this time. And because I am willing to go with 65% on my way to 100, I'm the bad guy. At least that's my perception. Maybe other people will have other views. But that is, unless people have comments in the chat, that's going to be the end of the show. I had a lot of fun. This was fun for me. I love doing politics. I love doing political analysis. I'm looking at this thinking there would actually be a really good, obviously it's a self-selected biased sample, but it's this data in terms of like all the, just doing this by person in the transcripts and looking at the narrative structures and the values and the themes. And also then you could separate out like the narratives by the person's gender or their identity, like if they are identified as a veteran or if they're identified as a Republican activist, do the narratives change based on their identity location, or are there some values that transcend narratives no matter which former Republicans are telling them? Oh, all kinds. This is like, woo! If I didn't have so much writing to do already, it would be like another project. But anyway, do I think these Republicans will actually vote for Biden on Election Day? Yes. Yeah, I really do. Voting is actually not as much work to go to the ballot. These people are longtime voters. If you vote at every single election, that's the best predictor. Like if you've been a voter who's turned out at election after election after election, that is the best predictor if you will vote again. So these people have an ethos of voting. If they're Republican activists, they are invested in the process. And so they will vote. And they I think if they're going on public and saying this, I do think they're going to vote for Biden. Because how are they different? Right? How are they different from the people in my study? I think the difference between the Conservative Party, the disaffected Conservative and disaffected Labor voters in 2010 is that while they were upset with like Tony Blair wasn't perfect and Gordon Brown wasn't perfect, or they weren't convinced David Cameron could lead whatever, they didn't actually hate David Cameron. They didn't hate Gordon Brown. They might have been upset with them, but they probably like hated the other party more. And so the liberal Democrats were sort of like being edgy. It's like thinking about having an affair, but then you're actually like go to the hotel bar to meet the person. And you're like, ooh, these consequences, now that I'm actually here, I'm not sure if I feel comfortable with the consequences of stepping out of my long-term relationship. What these people are describing to me is a complete emotional break with their party. People like Chase said, I didn't leave the Republican Party left me. The woman that we just watched said, I thought he would be better, and he violated my trust. So I think the reason I believe that these people can actually be converted over to Biden voters is, again, not because they're so enamored of Biden. He's just a safe pair of hands. He's inoffensive enough to allow them to choose him over Trump. But what's really driving them is Trump has driven them out of the party. Trump's hypocrisy, or GOP hypocrisy, is more than they can live with. And so to go back and vote for a party of hypocrisy, or vote for a party that you feel like betrayed you or left you, is not nearly the kind of cost. If you just go, it's going to be one time I'm going to vote for Biden, is sort of I think that's why I would say they are going to actually follow through and vote for Biden. Hey, Flint, you came right in the end, but I hope you heard the violent, sexy dancing from Kevin. I don't know if you caught it in the happy hour. There was a lot of it toward the end. Okay, I think that's the last question. So, yeah, thanks you all for coming by the show and staying with me for 2 hours that we've been going now. Quick note on my book club. I had a terrible migraine. Terrible. Now I've got to change my... There we go. I had too much of a gap at the top of my head. Had a terrible migraine on the day I intended to make the video for that. Kind of like... actually, do I still have it around here? Yeah. I don't know about you guys. I get migraines occasionally. And... like really, really bad, it might become photophobia. I think you're photophobic. I was walking around with like a sleep patch on like one eye because any light on it was just agony. There's so much pain. I ended up vomiting. That kind of bad migraine. And all I could do was sleep. The only thing that, like, ibuprofen doesn't touch it. Pill, like any kind of, none of that. The only thing I can do is sleep it off. And so I had to take a sick day off of work. And I don't know else about you guys. I said I was going to go, and then I don't. I do this all the time. Sorry, Rory Katz. I anticipated your thanks for the show message. Yeah, and then when I get done with a migraine, I'm a little bit, even though I'm not in pain, I'm still out of it. Like, I can't think and focus very well. And as a consequence, I didn't want to risk looking at a screen, didn't want to thinking about the book. But I have read the next chapter in The Social Construction of Reality. And I've made notes on it. I'm going to go over the notes a second time to make sure that I have understood exactly what points they're making in the section. And then I'll go over it a third time to finalize the show, and I'll make the video probably sometime this week. I am on holiday now for the next 2 weeks, so it should really have no problems. Maybe I'll just hurry up and burn through the book because the chapters are pretty quick. Okay, that was it. That was all I wanted to say. Thank you all. No worries that you're late, Flint. I'm glad you were able to show up. You can go back and you can go back and watch from the beginning. And I think that's all that's left to be said. So until next Sunday, or the next happy hour, or the next reading book, or whatever, I've been Christy. Y'all been awesome. All y'all been awesome. And yeah, until next time, bye-bye. Ah, dang it. I didn't have the right thing up. Am I sure I want to end the stream? I definitely want to end the stream. Okay. Bye.